You can also do this with people in your environment. You know, this is something B.F. Skinner pointed out when he was training animals. He said, you can use threat and punishment to train animals. But he said the most effective mode of training isn't that at all. You use sustained attention and reward. And so imagine that you're training a rat to climb up a ladder, rung by rung, and then do a little dance on the top and then climb down the other side. So what Skinner would do, his animals were hungry, by the way. They were starved to 75% of their body weight, so they were pretty dopaminergically motivated by the provision of any food. He would watch them wander around in the cage where a ladder was, let's say, a little rat monkey bar apparatus. And then when the rat would get near the ladder, he'd give it a food pellet. So then it was soon spending a lot of time near the ladder. And now and then, while it was monkeying about, it would put one foot on one paw on the first rung. It was like food pellet. And then it would soon be doing that. And then sooner or later, it would put the next paw on and he'd reward it. And so Skinner trained pigeons to pilot guided missiles by pecking on photos in relationship to the ground they were watching. Right, so
spectacular.
He could use reward in an unbelievable. So one of the things you can do in your local environment and with yourself as well is you can watch the people around you and you can see when they make small steps towards manifesting some behaviors you'd like to see a lot more of. And then you can tell them in this very differentiated, discriminatory manner, you can say, hey, look, here's the sequence of actions you just undertook. I saw that, I noted the process, and here's the delightful outcome. Good work. And man, if you do that repeatedly to people around you, and you don't want to do this in a fake or manipulative way, but if you're attentive to what people are doing that's good, and you mark that with a reward, man, you produce behavioral transformations at a rate that's just beyond belief.
I love it.
And everyone feels great about it too. Yeah, it's really a good habit, man. It's giving credit where, that's separating the wheat from the chaff in the truest sense. To give credit where credit is due.
Yeah, the behavior.
And you can imagine you're facilitating growth in the manner that you just described. And maybe what neurologic or genetic transformation, we didn't get to the gene expression part yet.
Yeah, the behaviorists like Skinner were truly brilliant. And I think one experiment that I think is worth mentioning, which is kind of speaks to the power of dopamine and why it's so vital to tap into these systems even through menial tasks and then to build on their self-amplifying mode so that you can take on bigger things in life, so to speak, positive goals, is there's a classic experiment now that's been done in humans and in animals where you take two rats, separate cages, or you could do this with humans where they're naturalistic conditions where one of the rats or humans actually has their dopamine depleted. In humans, this happens through Parkinsonian things or the ingestion of drugs which accidentally deplete the dopaminergic neurons. And what you find is that if you give them an opportunity to experience something pleasureful, like hit a lever and get a pellet of food, or people to access some very tasty food, both people with dopamine and with very depleted dopamine, animals with dopamine or without dopamine will eat the food. They will pursue the food, but only if it's right in front of them. If you put any kind of task between a person or an animal and a reward, what you find is that a rat won't move one rat's length to press a lever to get the food. So they are able to experience pleasure, but what they are unable to do is to embark such that...
So does that mean that if you believe when you are at the outset of a task that you're doing something important, so you're approaching a valued goal, and you have a lot of anticipation as a consequence of that, does that mean that you put yourself in a neurochemical state that facilitates learning?
Absolutely, without question.
So if you believe what you're doing is important, if you truly believe that because it's related to an important goal and it's a pathway forward, then that's going to transform into a manifestation of neuroplasticity.
Absolutely, and every time I hear about the sort of, woo statements about, I don't want to offend anyone here, but sure, I'll just say, you hear about the secret or manifesting or intention. All of that is it's capturing a fundamental principle of the way that our neurology works, which is that the prefrontal cortex, as a rule-setting but flexible rule-setting machine that taps into the dopamine system, can absolutely adopt new rules for reward release in the brain. Again, there's basically only one reward system. There's also serotonin system, as you know, but the dopamine system is the major currency of reward. So much so that, for instance, everyone knows that food is rewarding. We anticipate food. We eat a delicious steak or something, and we feel rewarded. However, if you are somebody who can attach thoughts such as fasting is good for me, I'm going to do intermittent fasting, or I'm not going to eat those foods, and therefore I'm going to attach my thinking to the rewards that will come with better health, better aesthetics, etc. The dopamine system responds. It's not just a belief in a narrative, it's a real response. And what actually starts to happen is that people start to enjoy the foods that they are restricting themselves to more. There are actually beautiful data on this from my colleague Ali Crum's laboratory at Stanford, that if you believe a food is nutritious and good for you, it actually has better impact on your physiology. Of course, there are the rules of physiology and nutrition that still apply, right? You can't tell yourself that the garbage is good for you, right? But there's a significant scaling up of the positive response that's associated with dopamine and hormonal cascades, which we can talk about in a moment. In the same way, if one adopts a sort of a Carol Dweckian, it's not about you literally.
Yeah, well, those are at least micro narratives.
That's right.
Right, so they're not integrated across a long span of time, but they're not nothing. And so one of the things, well, I did write about this in my first book, particularly about putting your house in perfect order. It's like, well, if you're lost, one of the things you could do is look around and see what direction you could take locally, is fix something. And I used to tell my clients, this is a very good thing to know. Find something that you could do that would make things better that you would do. And there's a humility in that too, because especially if you're in a low energy state, it's like, oh my God, I don't have enough energy to make dinner. It's like, do you have enough energy to put a fork on the table? And sometimes people are so depressed that that's really all they can do. It's like, can you take a small step forward, no matter how small that is? And so I knew that adrenaline was a byproduct or down the biochemical chain from dopamine, but I didn't get the significance of that fully. So basically what you're saying is that if you implement a micro routine, even something like washing a cup and putting it back in the shelf, and that's a good thing because you have a shelf and there's cups on it, you've already decided that's an appropriate way to live, is to have your coffee cups on a shelf. If you go ahead with cleaning out the cup and putting it on the shelf, then you've taken steps towards a valuable micro goal. You get a dopamine kick from that. That transforms itself into adrenaline and energizes you.
Which then...
So that's partly the reason that it has an antidepressant effect.
That's right, and then you can lean into another behavior. I mean, some of the more successful classes of antidepressants, again, not for everybody, are the ones of the dopaminergic, adrenalinergic variety, right? Things like bupropion, as opposed to, there's a lot of debate about SSRIs, they tap into a different system. You asked about gene expression changes. There's neuroplasticity, which is on the short scale. Completion of an even trivial task like the putting away of the cup will give you more dopamine, which gives you more adrenaline, which in this analogy of either being back on one's heels, flat-footed, or forward center of mass, regardless of where one is starting out, let's say depressed is back on one's heels, it's going to tilt you forward a little bit. And then it's a question of what you do with it. So the cognitive appraisal is critical because, again, with the prefrontal cortex being so critical in establishing which of these loops gets repeated, the cognitive appraisal is critical. I'm somebody who can get things done even if they're small. Now, if you do the cognitive appraisal,
or you can take another cognitive appraisal there too, which is small things are not small.
That's right.
Precisely for the reason that we just described. It's like you might have the cognitive appraisal that doing something local, like cleaning up your room, is small, but it's not obvious at all that that's the case. It's not that trivial to put your immediate surroundings in order, and it can easily be the stepping stone to putting things in order on a broader scale. In fact, it's probably the necessary stepping stone to do that. And so they might seem small, but they're a step ahead, and ahead is a good direction.
Absolutely.
And so they're not as small as you might think. And so you can pat yourself on the back, especially if you're depressed, a little harder than you might otherwise by saying, you say, well, this is trivial, but I did it. It's like, no. If you're moving ahead, tilting yourself forward in your metaphor, that's not small. You just keep doing that, and you're going to get out of this paralyzed or retreat mode. And then God only knows what you're going to be able to do.
That's right. And I think that if people were to look at these neurological and psychological processes, because we're really talking about both, is as algorithms, right? These are algorithms that have been used by every animal. Think about the animal that's foraging for food. They go down one path, they're surprised they find food. They go down another path, they're sure they're on a scent. They are sure, and then they get nothing. Well, what happens? They learn to remember. They automatically remember everything that led to that failure. And people are very good at remembering that. But be good at remembering the things that led to successes, and then ride those neurochemical waves to the next node of exploration. You're talking about exploration versus anxiety.